And so I came back to Eindhoven, the HTI group, to do my PhD. So the topic was about modeling and changing people's lifestyle behaviors, such as like encouraging people to do more physical exercise or changing people's daily diet. The focus of the project was on the psychological process of habit formation and the self-control. So I tried to model those processes using computational models and also sort of implement computational models in intelligent systems, for instance, for more accurate behavior prediction. So that's a bit different from what I want to talk about today. You can ask like whether my PhD thesis was related to AI or not. I think it's somewhat related to AI. So the project was within the data science collaboration between TUE and Philips Research. So back then in 2015, I think no one was talking about AI yet. It was big data science was the buzzword back then. So I also work with some people from computer science. So I use a bit of computational modeling and machine learning in my own work. So that's a good connection with AI. In terms of topic on autonomy, really not so much during my PhD. I included maybe a little bit discussion on what are the ethical implications of this behavior change systems on people. So autonomy is one of them, but that was a very brief discussion. Then after my PhD, I decided to go to a different environment. So I went to Utrecht to do a postdoc in the Department of Psychology. I always wanted to be in the more hardcore traditional psychology department for a while. So that was one of the motivation. We'll talk a little bit more about the HumanAI project in a bit. And then last October, I went back to my old research group as assistant professor. So right now, I have a couple of different research lines. So like I still continue to do a bit work on habit, on self-control, and try to model those processes and to see how we can use those models for behavior change. Then some topics more relating to AI, such as decision-making and autonomy issues in human-AI interaction. Also started to work with some other people in my group on human-robot interaction, especially focusing on emotions. And I have also the idea maybe to use a social robot also for behavior change purposes. And that's one new area I want to sort of invest some time. In terms of teaching, maybe it's nice to mention that I'm also developing a new human-AI interaction course. I don't know if there's anything similar here at TU Delft. We'll be happy to discuss with you also about similar projects. So I want to say a few words about the whole HumanAI Alliance program. So this is the core team. I think it was a project awarded to Professor Hankart from the psychology department at Utrecht University, and also Panos Markopoulos from industrial design at TU Eindhoven, and Subhaya and I was hired to do the real work. We also have like 20 to 30 participating researchers from all the different institutes. They are not like very closely connected, so it really depends on whether some people want to work with us on some of these topics. So a bit about the motivation. So this project was founded in 2019. I think that was the time when kind of researching interesting AI has really gained a lot of traction from like different disciplines. A lot of, I think, initiatives on like human-centered AI, and in this program, the focus is really on the tension between like machine and human autonomy, whatever it is. But there's a general concern, I think, as a lot of machines around us start to like make automatic decisions. They even move around, like they can act on their own. There's of course a worry that people might lose a sense of control, a sense of even like the core value of like humans being like the autonomous beings. So this was the efforts to sort of to strengthen the research in this area, sort of with people from both Utrecht region and also Eindhoven. So when I was doing the postdoc, there was actually, besides my research, there was a lot of effort on creating some kind of joint education. So what we did was, I think, something quite novel. So we organized those events inviting like students and researchers from different institutes to get to know each other. Then we founded like 7 joint master thesis projects in about 2 years. So this was something I really enjoyed doing because you really help some researchers to get to know each other. Also, students, they like it a lot because they can work not like completely individually, but in a big team. They learn from supervisors from different fields. I think that's really also very helpful for their like career in science or in the industry. So talking about research, I want to talk about mainly about 2 projects. There were actually many more ideas that we come up with during the more or less 1.5 year, but in terms of research, it was not optimal for many reasons, and mainly due to the COVID. The project was really in the middle of the whole pandemic, so we couldn't access like lab resources, like no way to really build like physical prototype. Also, in terms of collaboration, was also a bit challenging. So the 2 projects I want to talk about are both sort of online experiments on more kind of conceptual levels about these autonomy issues in human AI interaction. So in the first project, we try to propose a new functional model of personal autonomy, and we did 3 empirical studies to test the model. We also wanted to know like does it matter if like the agent that constrains you is a real person, it's another person, or a AI agent. So this leads to the very fundamental question: what is autonomy? To be honest, for this question, I don't feel like I can commit myself to just one definition. Even now, there were a lot of different opinions in the literature from different fields. Even among our core team, there are just different ideas. Even for student projects, sometimes they got confused. For most cases, it is fine as long as you sort of define it precisely in your way and you focus on your real research question. But I do think it's very interesting to talk a little bit about different perspective and how we sort of define and try to do some research on it in our projects. If you don't know much about the topic, I think the starting point for the whole discussion about autonomy, it has 2 different traditions in philosophy. So there was Jean Mill. According to him, autonomy is really about sort of liberty and freedom of choice. You might have heard like the no harm principle. So it means basically we shouldn't interfere with other people's choice unless there would be some, unless they would hurt or harm others. So that's really the liberty perspective. And on the other hand, you got Kant, and for him, autonomy means something totally different. It has a very strong moral sense. Autonomy really means doing the right thing or doing the sort of the morally right thing. And he talked about rational self-rule, rational self-control. So to give one example, so if someone is able to decide all by, let's say, himself or herself to eat a lot of, let's say, junk food, according to Mill, that would mean this person is autonomous, but not according to Kant, because according to Kant, your action should actually reflect not like your sort of first order, like kind of inborn desire, like tasty food, but should reflect some kind of rational thinking. What's really good for you, what's responsible for the society, for instance. So that this is the one key sort of 2 different camps, and you see a lot of later definitions or follows one of these 2 different views. And I think in psychology, the concept of autonomy was mainly discussed in the self-determination theory. It's a very popular theory, so even if you are not from psychology, you probably heard a little bit about it. So according to self-determination theory, autonomy is like one of the main human needs, like out of the 3 different needs. This need perspective means that people kind of need autonomy in order to function in the right way or to have motivation to do different things. I'm not really a fan of this theory since I always found it a little bit vague, and even within the theory, the meaning of autonomy sometimes it's a bit unclear to me. But I should say the theory did contribute a lot in terms of briefly demonstrate the importance of autonomy for human functioning and well-being. So in bioethics, autonomy is also a very important concept. So here, this is a very interesting framework called the intervention ladder by Newfield Bioethics Council. So what they show here is they categorize different type of interventions in terms of sort of how strong they are, how much they affect people's behavior, and also how much they undermine people's personal autonomy. So if you look from the bottom and move to the top, so this intervention becomes stronger and stronger, and also in terms of the relative influence on autonomy, this also becomes much stronger. So for example, the most, let's say, neutral one would be just you observe people's behavior or you monitor people's behavior without any active intervention. Then you can do a little bit more by maybe educating people, then moving upwards. You have, for instance, you can guide people's choice through the use of default. This links to, I think, research on nudging. So this is already like at the middle level. Then you have, if you change the incentives, that's really would have a big negative impact on personal autonomy. And in the end, you could basically restrict or people's choice or eliminate people's choice altogether by maybe regulations or by laws. So that would be the strongest restriction on autonomy. And then in the more engineering field, in AI computer science, sometimes autonomy is also used as meaning the same like human-like capacities and intelligence. Almost sometimes it's used, I feel like almost interchangeably with the word intelligence, which I think gives a little bit maybe, I think, like more ambiguity to what you want to convey with the word autonomy. But there are more specific theories, such as if you talk about how to decide whether a system is autonomous, there's one perspective that you would look at whether the systems can make decisions and can act in the sort of physical environment by their own, so without any intervention from human users or operators. There's another I found pretty interesting idea it's quite old idea in the 1990s. So according to these people, they define kind of a framework. They categorize all different entities in the world to three different categories. So you start with like objects, it's like maybe your cup. So they basically they just sit there passively, then basically waiting for you to use them to achieve your goals. They cannot actively do anything. Then you have agents. So you can think about maybe software agents or some just typical automation. So those, if you give the system kind of a goal, they will just do something by their own. But according to this framework, the agents can be called autonomous only if the systems would actually, they can generate their own goals based on the external environment and even based on the internal motivation. So I think the agent at this level would already qualify as kind of autonomous according to this definition, but not according to Locke and Invero. Also found the idea of internal motivation is pretty interesting because I think it's still pretty difficult to say what is the internal motivation for a artificial system, even in today's applications. So in our research, we have the idea to sort of propose a functional model of personal autonomy. So this is actually more or less the idea of handcards for my postdoc supervisor. So according to this model, you would say a person is autonomous if this person has, first of all, some kind of agent capacity. So that's really kind of an internal ability. Like you need to have, you need to be able to basically to act in the physical world. You need to have cognitive function to think and to decide. If you have issues with those things, then basically you cannot be autonomous. And then in addition to the ability, for a person to be autonomous, they also need to have a active goal. So they need to want to achieve something, for instance, to satisfy their motivation or needs. And the goals, of course, can be very general, can be very specific. You can talk about having a goal of living a healthy life. You could also have a goal of you want to eat salad this evening. So goal the level can change from very general to very specific. Then when there is a goal, then you can talk about the environment. You can talk about whether someone has actually sort of opportunities to achieve the goal by specifying the different determinators. So here we have the different sort of specifics about goal pursuit, like the what, when, and how. So in our research, basically, we focus on the determination of these specific goal pursuit components, like the what, the when, and how. So we assume, of course, we don't look at the case when someone doesn't have capacity or doesn't have even a goal. So we assume that someone has a goal, and in order to pursue a goal, these are the things you need to specify. So you could call this like 3 different goal pursuit components. You could also call this maybe just 3 different type of decisions you need to make before you can achieve your goal. So what does this mean? So I think this is in a way quite intuitive. You could say the what component is about really what you will do in order to achieve a goal. So this basically set like a more concrete goal to basically, or like kind of a behavior that you need to carry out to achieve the goal. And you can think about the when component, so that's about timing. It's about when do you want to do that thing. And then you have the how component is about how would you want to do that. And normally there are just multiple different methods to achieve the same goal. So this is like at a slightly lower level than the components, the what component. So in the psychology literature and also in neuroscience, they are research that shows some distinction between, for instance, the what and the when components, and also the what and the how components. I'm not going into details, but here talking about some like real life examples, so you can think about those different components in certain applications. So if you look at the subscription from NS, they are different kind of restrictions in terms of the what, when, and how. For instance, some subscription only allow you to, for instance, go to a certain city or place. You have to sort of say, okay, that's where I want to go. And other subscriptions basically restrict you from like when can you travel, like you can or you cannot travel during the peak hours. And then finally, there's also the how aspect, like whether you can travel maybe in the first or second class. You can also think about, for example, drivers who use Uber. So the Uber has algorithm that sort of manage all these workers. Then their behavior might also be restricted in terms of the different aspect, like which customer they should pick up, when they should pick up the customer, and also maybe through which routes should they drive to the customer. So in a lot of real life examples, you can sort of make distinction between these different components. So in the empirical studies, we ask the question, what is the relative importance of these three different decision-making aspects in determining people's personal autonomy? So if you restrict the what, when, and how, and which restriction would lead to like a stronger sense of reduced autonomy. We have like no. I think we thought like, of course, all three should be important, but the question is really about the relative importance. And we also wanted to know, do they also interact to influence autonomy, or the influence on autonomy is more or less sort of independent from each other? And so, for example, if you restrict the word component, maybe the one component doesn't matter anymore because maybe the word is just a very strong restriction. So we want to see whether there will be any interaction or there will be actually no interaction. And secondly, we want to know, does it matter if the restriction comes from a person or from an AI agent or algorithm? So there are, of course, a lot of research looking at differences in trust and acceptance in terms of decisions made by human experts or AI algorithms. And I think sometimes studies found that people are aversive to algorithms, but in some other studies, they also found people seem to like AI algorithms than the opinion from experts. But there's not much like really the different type of restrictions AI algorithms can impose on human users. So that's one of the novel aspect of our study. So we did three experiments, online experiments. I want to focus on study 1A. So because the other two experiments are extensions and replication of the first. So in this first study, we have basically a 3x2x2x2 design. Sounds rather complex, but the basic manipulation is that we manipulate, of course, the three different components. So each of these aspects could be decided by oneself or could be decided by another agent. So all these are manipulated within subjects. And then we have another factor, so the source of the restrictions. So could be from a human, could be from AI agents, and we have a baseline condition which we don't specify the type of the source of restriction. So this is manipulated between subjects. And what we did was we basically give people they imagine themselves being in different scenarios. Including travel, work, health, and social, so different type of goals they may want to achieve. And they go through like 8 different scenarios in random order, so where these different things were manipulated. And we measure the perceived autonomy in terms of the freedom of choice, control, the restriction on autonomy, and also responsibility. And all these items we basically aggregate to have one measure of perceived autonomy. So this is how the task looks like. So the first, basically, they read a kind of description of a scenario. For instance, here is about planning the holiday, so very brief, like kind of abstract description. Then we also basically told them like what are the meanings of these different decisions, like the what, when, and how. And then they were told that they are going to look at 8 different scenarios. These decisions can be made either by themselves or by another person. And so this is how each trial looks like. So we basically visualize the allocation of these different aspects using a diagram. So in this trial, then all the 3 different components are determined by oneself. And in this trial, you see that this is a case where someone can decide on the when, let's say to travel, but cannot decide about the what and the how. And those are determined by supposedly to be by the other person. Then they answer the four questions for the measurement. So they are for each type of goal pursuit, there are 8 trials, and this was presented in random order. We also manipulate the source of the restriction. So these are different versions of the instruction text the participant need to read. Again, this is quite abstract. We don't want to define like who is the other person or what kind of AI. So it's just very much on the conceptual level in this first project. And in terms of the background, we basically it's the same. We just change the label here for it could be the other person in the human condition, the AI agent in the AI condition, or we just basically say something is constrained in the baseline condition. We did 2 replications. So in study 2, we wanted to rule out the possibility that the order of introducing and regionalizing the component would bias the result, because we always put the word on top and when and how. But we found that actually doesn't matter. Also, we want to show like, can we just simply ask people like which aspect they consider to be the most important? But then we found what they self-report is quite different from what is revealed in the from the task. And we did a third study where we extend the study to the more organizational settings, like allocating job tasks or making like a career plan. We also replicated the human versus AI effect. I will say in a while what we found. And we include 2 additional dependent variables, like how much they would like a decision-making situation, and also do they actually accept sort of to go along with the situation defined in the scenario. So this is very basic result from study 1. So you see the 3 different between subject conditions, the baseline, human, and AI. And you also see basically what we found was that when you remove each of the component from one's own control, perceived autonomy would basically go down. So that's quite unsurprising. You see also like what happens when, for instance, here the what plus when. So these 2 are controlled by oneself in that trial, but not the how. So this is maybe a bit easier to understand the basic result from the study. So here we plotted the regression coefficient. So these are basically the effect sizes of these 3 different components, and also the 2-way interaction effect and the 3-way interaction effect. What we found was that if you restrict any of the 3 components, perceived autonomy will basically be reduced substantially. We found very little interaction effect. So that's like all these different components, they the what, when, how they affect autonomy more or less like independently. So you see the interaction effect are very close to 0. We also didn't find any difference between the human and the AI condition, both in study 1 and study 3. So you see the bars with different colors, and really only tiny differences. If you compare that to the effect size of just removing this component, that's like, for instance, here, like it's all close to 1. That means if you restrict any of those, the perceived autonomy will be reduced by 1 point on a 7-point scale. We try to compare the relative importance, and in study 1 and 2, we found sort of a consistent order of what, how, and when in terms of their importance. So it's like people did consider the what to be maybe the most central to perceived autonomy, followed by how and when. We saw this is pretty consistent, should replicate again, but not really in study 3 when we use a little bit more concrete scenario in organizational settings. And here you find a much smaller difference, and it seems also the when component now becomes a bit more important than the how. So to conclude, the 3 studies. So I think it was not surprising that, of course, in such an abstract experiment, if you just manipulate the restriction on these different aspects, personal autonomy and also goal motivation always go down. We didn't find interaction effect, meaning that perhaps in a way you can say you can sort of compensate the removal of one component by maybe giving people freedom to choose maybe another in terms of another component. So if you restrict the word component, maybe it's nice to give people to choose like when they can do something. We were initially kind of excited about, seems to be like a clear order in this different aspect, but that was not really replicated in the third study. We also didn't find the difference in terms of restriction from human and AI. Of course, at least not in such a quite abstract experiment. In real application context, of course, that could still be a different story. At least I think that way. Then one thing I actually found a bit struggling is like what kind of design implications you can think of from the result. As I said, the model was sort of really from like a very strong kind of a conceptual psychological perspective. So we also want to hear your opinion. Do you think some of this result might be interesting in terms of creating kind of design space, like different, can you separate the different components, like which one you want maybe the AI systems to constrain and which one you want people to be free to choose. So I want to continue with somewhat different, talk about somewhat different study. So this is the work. Oh, sorry. So this is the work mainly by my collaborator Subhaya from the ID departments at TUE. So this is a little bit more, a little bit closer to application. So we wanted to look at what are the effects of providing explanation, and also like maybe making people to be aware of like there's really an AI or algorithm behind some applications. So what would be consequences on people's perceived autonomy, and in terms of like very common, basic, everyday sort of interactions with AI. So we have mainly 3 different research questions. So we want to know, does providing explanation help to sort of protect perceived autonomy to some extent? Of course, there's a lot of research on explainable AI. So the general idea is that this should, I think, normally would be a good thing. So we want to see whether indeed, if you provide explanation, maybe people are less intimidated by some automated recommendation. Want to know how does also the awareness of AI influence perceived autonomy. This we don't have like a clear prediction. We don't know whether making people to be more aware of the algorithm or some like AIs behind the system is beneficial or is detrimental for perceived autonomy. Finally, we also want to explore are there like differences, of course, like different everyday applications, such as like movie recommender or like car navigation system, kind of smart home application, or like social media sort of filtering of like what you read. So what we did was, again, online experiments where we used I think it's called design fiction method to create different scenarios using some video clips. We had a 2x2 between subject design. So for each application, the participant either they saw a explanation or they don't see any explanation, and they were made to be highly aware of the AI behind the system, or that was not the case. We got over 300 participants from Polyfic, so about 80 participants per condition. So the person basically they went through the 8 applications in a rundown order. So we used some videos to show the behavior of those AI infused systems. I will show a few examples of the video in a minute. Then we measure perceived autonomy. So this time using a bit more questions, kind of more relevant to the applications. So you see, for instance, whether the system provides choices based on the user's true interest, or like the system left the user to do things their own way. So we have 5 of these items to measure perceived autonomy. So this is one example how the scenario looks like. So this is with like left flags. So it shows like when you log in. So this is the condition. The presence of some kind of algorithm is made very salient. So they read this that this show kind of artificial brain, and and this is also a condition with explanation. So for each movie recommended, there is some labels underneath showing that what are the reasons that you might like certain movies, like certain actor or certain genre of film. And this is I think the thermostats application. Yeah, so again, you can see some explanations here about why the system set like this particular temperature for your room. And finally, this is a example from the car navigation application. So also some explanations are here. So again, it was a 2x2 design. So either they see something like this, like highlighting the presence of AI, or they see something much simpler. So and also for some participants, they explanations were provided by the system, or there's no explanation. So what we found, we checked whether the manipulation sort of work or not. Whether people actually notice the differences. But that seems to be all right. So people they were aware of the explanation. So it was a different rating in terms of how much do you think the system was providing any explanation between the different conditions, and also in terms of the manipulation of the awareness. But it was also clear that the manipulation of the explanation worked a lot better than the other one. The other one was maybe a bit too subtle. The difference between the conditions was pretty small. And if you look at all the results across all applications, it's actually nothing was really much interesting was happened. There was no effect of explanation, no effect of prime, this like higher awareness of AI, also no instruction effect. What becomes a little bit more interesting is that you look at the individual applications, and there was somewhat surprising to us that we found, for whatever reason, the car navigation system sort of stood out, because we seem to find actually pretty relatively strong effect of providing explanation of perceived autonomy. So if they were shown the explanation, the participant they perceived the autonomy to be higher in the car navigation case. So when you see this visualization, you can see the distribution are separated quite a bit here, but for all the applications, there was almost just totally overlap.
Just to check, was that corrected to multiple comparisons?
It was, so we sort of divided like the alpha by 8, and also, to be honest, we had a quite large sample, like 80 per between subject condition. So I was also thinking whether this is like a flirt or you could replicate. I tend to believe you probably would replicate, but it could be something specific really in the design of our scenario, or it could be something more interesting. Really, the kind of application is have some like different special attributes maybe compared to other applications. That's I think still quite debatable.
Chao, just to check. So, sorry, we want to leave some room for discussion.
Yes.
So if you could wrap up, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, almost at the end of the talk. I have a couple more slides, but I will skip some of the more recent some like brief idea. But now we also compare like the differences across the applications. So regardless of regardless of our manipulations of providing explanation or not, or priming the AI or not, you also see some trends in terms of like what kind of application people seems to be worried about. Maybe personal autonomy a bit more than others. If you do some proper test, and you could argue that it seems like for social media, like like Facebook, that filter like what you see from your friends, for instance, that is this is like worried the most probably by for the participants, also the climate control, but for like fitness coaching and car navigation. Those were people tend to perceive just higher autonomy regardless of the different manipulations. So I thought it was interesting to observe the difference across the different applications, and that hasn't been done a lot. And the other question is why this kind of application system stood out. So is it because of that it's kind of a more time-critical application that's about like real-time decisions or actions, or something else? I don't know. Could also be just the way we design the scenario. That's interesting. And I think one limitation is that the manipulation of this awareness of AI was maybe interpreted differently by different participants, like showing the brain. People could think about data privacy issues. They could think about, okay, maybe the system is very smart, or could all go all different ways. I think I will stop here. There are some other things that we can also talk maybe in the next half an hour. But I want to know if there are any questions about what I presented.
Great, thank you.
So quick comment question on the last project. The question there is to what extent the design scenarios implied action. And so I'm thinking maybe if one thinks of the Netflix movie recommendation, maybe there's an expectation of picking one anyway. So explanations might not matter so much, whereas with the Nest, it looked like there was no option of a follow-on action, so I couldn't go and suggest to change the temperature. And with the car, then you have maybe two options. You can say, I can take that route or that route. So that was just a question if there was a thought around which actions are implied by the scenario. And then the other question was around the what, when, and how. You spoke about context dependency that you've seen. To what extent do you think there's also cultural dependency?
So thanks for the I think very good questions. So for this study, I think there are actually many differences across the scenarios. To be honest, we try to make this to be realistic, but that would also mean you don't have a lot of control. So, for instance, as you suggest, like for the movie scenario, it's like you still need to take action to actually need to decide. But like the room temperature is sort of it's set for you, then you see some explanation or not. Those might, of course, change people's experience, even though sort of the only one that stood out was really the car navigation, because for the others, sort of, you know, the motivation we thought might influence how people perceive autonomy was not really the case. But indeed, perhaps because for the social media and the temperature control, indeed, people tend to perceive, indeed, if you look at the table, a little bit lower just autonomy in general, could indeed maybe because of, you know, in those cases, it's like the decision is made. You just see what's come out of the algorithm, and you are either happy or unhappy. But I guess for some other things, we recommend you still need to make an active choice. Car navigation sort of also a little bit. But I would say probably we need like more dedicated studies to, if you want to also separate those different factors. And in terms of the cultural difference for the different components, I don't know. I tend to think if we use such a abstract study, probably not. The context could probably be indeed quite critical. And however, somehow from the first two studies, we found a very consistent order, even for different sort of scenario, like planning a travel or planning your work, or like just planning like a social event didn't seem to matter. But then when we switched to like more concrete scenario in organizations, then we found there were quite some variations in terms of the relative importance. So I also did a follow-up study where I want to sort of go beyond the really abstract scenario, but I did the experience sampling studies on different type of restrictions in people's decision for like 3 meals, like breakfast, dinner, lunch, and again ask them like what aspect was constrained or not constrained. Now over there, you again find in the kind of the case of dietary choices, the order is again not what we found, like the clear what, how, and when. So probably it indeed depends a lot on different type of goal pursuit.
Chao, before we continue the discussion, do you mind sitting here so that we can turn the camera so people in the online meeting can actually see all of us?
Yes.
Is that okay? Can you change slides from here? I think you can, right?
Do you want to?
Yeah, if you could just sit here. Maybe. Great. More questions. Sorry, Evgeny.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for a super interesting talk. I had a question actually about the first half, perhaps. So you laid out these really nice different conceptions of meaning, of autonomy that are out there, and then you proposed your own one. So, and I think that's the one you used in the setup of your experiment. So I wondered if you would have set up your experiment differently, or if you would have, perhaps, do you think the results should be interpreted differently if you had used different conceptions, or one of the other ones, maybe the Kantian one, or so would it have, would have changed?
I would say it's more or less followed the more kind of the liberty, like independence of view, because still reading about like restrictions and choice, not so much reading about sort of rational self-control doesn't have like a moral aspect. And I think what we came up with, like this comparison for these 3 different components, is also a little bit like investigation at slightly different levels. So it's not just about restriction or not, like or what people do. You know, do people follow like a second order or first order desire? But it's more like different let's say different type of restrictions. So I think in general it follows the more perspective that autonomy is about. You know, do you sort of control your own actions? Can you decide something by yourself? So I think that's how that was sort of implemented in the experiments. And this distinction between the different components, I would say it's something a bit quite specific. So I had actually a little bit difficult time at the beginning to see, is this really important? Because intuitively, you can talk about those different aspects. Although in real applications, they also often intertwine, sometimes if you can't decide like where to go, like also the timing is probably also constrained. So I thought, in what way, but perhaps in kind of the design scenarios, designers can really play with these parameters, to set like this like on off, like to create different type of interventions.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with you that so my intuition would also be that it really matters which of these meanings you would use, and that's why I'm really interested in also why you would think why you chose this specific one, because so if you choose perhaps the wrong conception of autonomy, then you might be designing or checking or measuring for something that you don't want to check for. But I think that so I think in the first part of your answer, you said something that this captures what we actually find important in this specific context. So is that indeed what is that a good interpretation of what you just said, or?
Yeah, more or less. So I think this idea, these different components, more follow from like some research psychology about like people's goal pursuit, like what are the different aspects and different decisions. So I don't know if like you take a completely different perspective on autonomy, how would that change the specification of this very specific things. So I would say it's somewhat like a slightly different angle. It's like about what type of restrictions, rather than whether you are being restricted or like in what way you are being restricted.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. You talked about it earlier in the presentation, but could you please explain again how, if I understand correctly, in your studies, autonomy is expressed as a number, right, numerically? So how does that measurement defined? And a related question, and it's related to some of the things that were discussed. Do you see some limitations in reducing the meaning of autonomy in this context to a number? What might get lost when we reduce to a number?
I think in both studies it was kind of measured on a 1 to 10 point scale. Like here, they basically read like to what extent do you feel that you have freedom of choice in such a scenario. So they imagine a scenario. This is how things are determined. They then basically choose one of the options. So could be they think this is really indeed that they have a lot of freedom or they have little freedom. We try to cover like the concept like some different dimensions. So we have one question about freedom of choice, one question about control, just like talking about restriction on autonomy very directly, and also responsibility. That's also open assumption that if you are not autonomous, then you are not responsible for action. So in this case, in the end, they correlate really highly, and we aggregate it. I think your question, like reducing this to numbers, how would that would be a limitation? I think yes, even though I think this is like, I would say like very common limitations in a lot of similar studies that you try to measure certain people's feeling or attitudes on using this type of numeric scale. You could of course use like a different approach, maybe doing qualitative research to ask how people really feel, then you can capture a little bit more perhaps nuances in terms of, maybe like again, like maybe even the what, when, and how these different restrictions, people might have like different specific feelings to them. And that's indeed, I think, not really captured by just these four items.
Just to quickly share, so from my experience with engaging with the students in some research projects where questions related to autonomy were investigated, that we found that this qualitative aspect to engaging with people and kind of really going into the nuance, that was really useful to then seeing what are the design directions for example, user interface. So that's where that nuance came to then inspire particular things to be designed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think indeed also some measures should be on the behavior level, so not just the rating, but how you can also sort of maybe observe how they would continue to maybe interact with system. I think that would be indeed also very useful in studying like the autonomy, perceived autonomy experience.
Great, thanks. Just final note, we are running out of time. So maybe one more question from David?
Yes, if possible. Thanks, Akari. No questions from the audience remote?
There is a question from Timon, but he's left already, so I think we just type reply to him later on.
So my question was, if I take a step back from your results, it seems like there were no big effects. And so similarly, my sense is also that maybe a qualitative perspective would actually really enrich the understanding. But I was also thinking, I'm a quantitative guy after all as well, so I was thinking maybe there's big confounding factors. Or maybe it's not a good metric, that could also be, but maybe it's big confounding factors. And so I was thinking, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of, in all of these cases of what would go wrong? And what's your ability to resolve misalignments? And my sense is, because that's what this community is about, so actually having some kind of control, and so it's also related to one of these autonomy factors. And so my question is, could you respond? To what extent do you think that this maybe preconceived perceptions of consequences and ability to actually do something about it actually play part in the variability and therefore perhaps the lack of big effects?
Yes, it's a really good point, because I also think like one main limitation, I wouldn't say it's like really confound the result, but in all these cases, it's not like very abstract scenarios. They don't really make decisions. They give a scenario how the decisions will play out. So that's the only thing they perceive. Then they rate basically how they feel about that situation. So they don't make real decision. They don't make choices. There's like no sort of consequences like manipulated in the experiment. So if they just look at how this is supposed to be the case showed in those diagrams. I think different people can relate to those scenarios in different ways and think about what would be consequences. I think even the way we describe like the other agent is also very abstract. There's no like, what is the relationship with this person to you, or it's not like, so all these things are not, let's say, fleshed out. So one idea I had sort of at the end of those was really you can still try to see, does these different components matter, the what, when, how, but for instance, using a different approach where you have people actually making decisions together with the system, like maybe I don't know, maybe a chatbot, through kind of conversation, you see different options, like some are constrained, some are not constrained. I think in that case, I would say it should give you a bit more realistic test on how these different dimensions matter.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd say it's technically over, but we can stick around for an after party because I think the room I mean, we didn't book it after 2, but nobody's showing up, so it's
Wait for half an hour.
yeah, great. But with that, I think we have to say goodbye to our online participants, and I'll stop the recording. And then I think David had a question. Okay. And you're just leaving. Okay.
Actually, maybe I have a comment, and now that we're here, just something to explore.